Welcome to Conversations. Our guest today, for the first of a two-part chat, is the celebrated director Francesca Zambello. Conversations is Lehman College's series of discussions with major theater and musical figures of our time. Welcome to Conversations, Francesca.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Bill.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to finally chat with you because we never have before.
No, I'm happy to be here and get to know you a little bit better.
We have quite a few colleagues in common, including Mark Adamo and John Coriano, both of whom teach here at Lehman College, and David Henry Wang, who doesn't teach here, but we just interviewed David Henry Wang. I chose to introduce the show with a collage from your ravishing production of The Little Prince, which you did at, I believe it's Houston Grand Opera in 2003, am I correct?
That's where it started. It's had many other incarnations since then.
It's just beautiful.
Thank you.
For those who don't know you and your work, I would say that you're a world-traveling premier director of opera and musical theater and musicals. Is that, would you say this is so?
I'd take that description.
Okay. You have done just about every genre. Which is your favorite?
I think whatever you're working on is generally your favorite. I find that if whatever I'm in the middle of, that's what is my favorite. I don't have a favorite musical or opera or genre to work in. I find that it's really best to go back and forth because that's what makes you appreciate each of the different ones so much.
Right. Is there a genre that you haven't done that you'd like to do?
Well, film, I suppose. I mean, I've made a few small films, but I imagine a big film. But for right now, I'm pretty happy in the world that I'm in.
Do you do a straight theater, you should pardon the expression?
Yeah. Actually, you mentioned David Henry Wang. I did a play of his, a world
play.
I did a play of his, a world premiere of a play of his called Tibet Through the Red Box, which we did at the Seattle Children's Theater. It's based on a wonderful children's novel, and it's really about a boy's journey through his father's letters, and his father was a cameraman in Tibet in the 1940s, and it was a straight play, and David and I did it together in Seattle, I guess about 3 years ago, and it was a great collaboration. We had all these musicians from Tibet come, and a lot of local actors, and it was a fantastic collaboration.
I loved interviewing him. He was wonderful. Where were you born?
I was born in New York City. I am a New Yorker.
Which part of New York?
Upper West Side.
Oh my God. And you're still on the Upper West Side.
And I still live on the Upper West Side. I had a very long detour around the world, basically, before I could get back to there.
Via education?
No, via my family. When I was growing up, my father worked for TWA, and he was Italian. My mother's American, and we moved to Europe when I was about 10, and we lived in France, Austria, Germany, and England. And then when I was in university, I went to Russia for a semester. So I took a big detour, and then I continued working in Europe all through my 20s and into my 30s, and then I really moved back to New York in my 30s.
Now, when did you know that you wanted to be a director?
As a child.
As a child?
Yes.
What were some of the symptoms?
I'm fortunate in that my mother is an actress, so I was around the theater at an early age. My father started as an actor before he became that businessman. And my mother, when I was growing up, was working on Broadway and did
What's her name?
Jean Sincere. And
oh, for God's sake.
Do you know her?
Yes.
Oh, well,
I don't know her personally, but I've seen her work.
But, and she's a character actress, still working, living in Los Angeles. But as a child, I was very often in backstage and watching shows from the wings, from the stage manager's desk. She did a lot of summer stock, and I frequently was with her out in places like Kansas City and Maine and Wisconsin, and we're in all those sort of great summer stock theaters. We're all over the place. And I really experienced the world from backstage. And at an early age, I knew that I wanted to be working backstage and telling a story that way. And then I had the symptoms, like I had a puppet theater that I set up under the piano, and then I corralled all of my friends at an early age and basically made up a story and directed everybody. And then, of course, as a director, if you're a control freak, it's a kind of natural thing, and I was as a child.
Well, that's perfect. There is a God.
Well, alpha personalities somehow wend their way to this side of the footlights, usually.
Now, you started your huge career at the Houston Grand Opera, am I correct?
That was where I got my first breaks directing Grand Opera. But I had, I would say, less perhaps auspicious beginnings. Actually, the first opera I ever directed was at the church next to Juilliard on 65th Street. But that doesn't go in my bio. You know, Houston is sort of what I consider my first big professional engagement.
Now, you quickly blossomed, and you've worked in, among other places. I mean, the list is too long to go down, but I'll mention St. Louis, San Francisco, Seattle, Iceland, Finland, Ireland, Los Angeles, the New York City Opera, Brooklyn Academy of Music, London, Santa Fe, and last but not least, the Metropolitan Opera, and now Broadway with The Little Mermaid. As a student, what were some of your role models?
Well, as a student, I think that in college, basically, I became interested in a lot of the great European directors.
Like?
Felsenstein, Giorgio Strehler, the Russian directors, Meyerhold. I mean, a whole sort of list of what we would consider the classical directors, the great 20th century directors of music theater, or more sort of physical theater when you think about, you know, Grotowski and this sort of thing. Those were all people who I was greatly influenced by as a student. Of course, once I got out and started working in my 20s, I met a lot of real directors who I started working for, and that was very different. I mean, Jean-Pierre Pinel was a mentor for me. He was a very famous opera director, and there. But as a student, I was really most influenced and interested in the great classical theater directors, and then of course the great film directors, from American to French to Russian.
I would, going through your career as I did in the last week, I noticed that if I had one noticeable thing about it is the tremendous leaps and jumps you've done. You go from one very different thing to one, and the next thing is very, very different. And I thought we would give an indication of how different, because we're going to go from The Little Prince to Die Walküre by Richard Wagner. Can we roll Die Walküre, please? That production was from the Washington National Opera also, and it starred Placido Domingo and Anya Kemper, Alan Held, and Linda Watson. I believe it was set in the South in America, am I correct?
Well, no, it's actually part of the Ring Cycle that I am in the middle of directing there. For those who don't know, the Ring Cycle is a 20-hour opera, basically in 4 parts by Richard Wagner, and it's sort of his greatest opus work and one of the mountains that is in the operatic repertory to climb. And I've done the first 2 installments, Rheingold and Die Valkyrie, which means the Valkyrie Sisters. And I'm about to do Siegfried and Götterdämmerung next year. And the whole approach to it, my whole approach has been really to set it in an American context. Since the Ring Cycle is really about the possession of the ring, obviously, but it's driven by greed and envy and willingness to sacrifice everything for material goods and the destruction of the natural environment and ecology. So these are clearly themes that are very much part of our life now. And so with my designers, we have set it in America, basically starting in kind of when our land was sort of a virgin territory up through today, really. By Götterdämmerung actually finishes with today.
Now, of course, Richard Wagner said it in the mythological Germany.
Right.
How far do you think operas, directors should go in resetting operas?
Well, for me, I mean, I consider my job as a storyteller. I think that's the director's job. I'm there to interpret the piece. The creator, the writers, wrote it. They are the original creators, and we are basically here only as interpreters.
Right.
I think that it's our duty to tell that story, to tell it in a way that will speak to an audience today, that will connect with them, that will make them think as well as entertain them. And so sometimes I think it's great to perhaps reset a piece, recast a piece. Sometimes I think it's important to be in a certain period. I think you can't generalize that. It's got to be a case-by-case situation.
Right.
I mean, this, in terms of the Ring, it was clear to me that Wagner was addressing important themes of his time, which are universal. They still speak to us today. And I very much wanted, since I was doing it in the nation's capital, which is the center of power, obviously, for us, it's a cycle about power, again, about material, the loss of material versus personal sacrifice. And so it was very important to me to try and find some contemporary parallel with the audience there. And Placido, who is the general director of that company, has been completely in support of it and has been a wonderful collaborator on it and in it.
That's fantastic. Now, people, directors have reset many operas in different places. Have you ever heard of people reorchestrating the music? I mean, there's a great feeling we can do what we want, how to convey the story. But has that ever affected the music?
Yes, I mean, I personally have been in situations where I've done it. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
And actually, just on the Ring alone, I know that it was reorchestrated. Jonathan Dove, a wonderful British composer, took the Ring Cycle and condensed it down to 10 hours and reorchestrated it for 20 players. It was kind of the big hits of the Ring, and it manages to tell the story rather well.
Interesting.
I did a version of La Traviata a number of years ago in a theater, the Skylight, which was one of my starting places, where I went back and took the play, the original play, the Lady of the Camellias, and mixed it with some parts of Verdi's opera, and we reorchestrated it, and basically it became a kind of chamber piece. And perhaps most famously is, of course, what Peter Brook did with Carmen when he created La Tragédie de Carmen, where it was reorchestrated, cut down, and where he went back to the novel. And I think that, I don't think that anything is sacred. It has to find a way to be alive. These composers wrote things to be live theater.
Right.
And if it were going to get stuck in just one thing, then you would be making a museum.
The same year that you did Die Valkyrie, and you did The Little Mermaid based on a Disney film on Broadway. I would say that's supremely flexible.
But they relate to each other. They do. I really think that, you know, people say, oh, how can you go from this to that to this to that?
That's my question.
I mean, again, I think that it's really, when I say our job, I think anyone who's a theater artist is that how do we best communicate a story to an audience? How do we reach an audience? How do we make people want to see live theater? I mean, we're in a art form that is, as you well know, under attack.
Right.
And that we, I think, have to be creating something that is so special and so unique that you can only get it in a theater. And that's why I think that to go from, yes, there are different forms musically and theatrically, but how you implement them actually is quite often the same. I mean, it's the same thing. You're there to tell the story. You're there to reach an audience.
It's the same task.
Ultimately, it is.
Yeah.
It's just that the means to get there sometimes is very, very different.
I would like to show our montage from The Little Mermaid, which I think is staggering.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful, beautiful directing job.
Thank you.
Can we roll it, please?
What would I give if I could live out in these waters? What would I pay to spend a day warm on the sand? Nature and land, they understand, but they don't reprimand their daughters. Bright young women, sick of swimming, ready to stand.
She's happy as off through the waves they roll. The fish on the land ain't happy, they circles in the bowl.
That fish in the bowl is lucky, they in for a wassail fit.
One day when the boss get hungry, guess you gon' be on the plate. Under the sea, under the sea, under the sea, under the sea. Nobody beat us, fry us and eat us in fricassee. Under the sea. We want the land folk love to cook. Under the sea, we on the hook. We got no troubles, like Mr. Bubbles. Under the sea, bubbles under the sea. The mute played a flute, the car played a harp, the blades played a bass, and they sang and shot. The bass played a brass, the chop played a chop. The flute is a groove of soul. The reggae can play the hits on the strings, the shout rocking out the blackfish she sing. The snap and the snap, they know where it's at. They know that love is born.
Oh, that's so charming. That was Sierra Boggess as Ariel, Sherry Renee Scott as Ursula, Sean Palmer as Prince, and of course Norman Lewis as King Triton. Do you have a philosophy of directing that guides you through these pieces? Do you have one philosophy?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that ultimately my job is there to serve the audience. I believe very much that we've made a pact. They came to the temple, which is the theater, and it is my job to make sure that I give them something to take home from the temple. And whether that be an idea that they carry with them, or a memory, or a thought, or an emotion, or something that hopefully stirs them in some way. And so for me, that's my prime motivating factor, is really, again, like the storyteller, but to make sure that I give them something that they can take away from there that will, in a sense, keep expanding exponentially.
How do you tell a story differently in music theater, in opera, Broadway, that differ from a straight play?
Well, I mean,
how does that affect you?
Well, the thing is, you have music. You know, music is primal.
Right.
Music is something that connects us all in a really almost mythic fashion, I believe. It's something that allows us to communicate, yes, with words because they're sung, but more so with a very deep physical resonance. We feel music inside of us. We feel rhythm. We feel a kind of, I believe, a river of sound is how I like to see it. And I think that music is the thing that inspires me and hopefully inspires all of my collaborators. And so, in a way, music is our guide. When you're doing a straight play, the word, you in a way have to create your own music around the word.
Right.
Whereas in an opera or in a musical, you're given the music and you have to find a way to visualize it, to physicalize it, to make it come alive. Right now it's just, like I say, a kind of a primal emotion, and suddenly you have to find a way to give it an inner life, to make it something that is going to be seen, heard, experienced, and so that's really how I approach it. I figure, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What do I want the audience to think about when they're watching it? How am I going to create it? I mean, in the instances we've just seen between The Little Prince, Valkyrie, and The Little Mermaid, each one of those, first of all, I had to define the physical world, and that is something that you do with your collaborators. The director is really the person who pulls together, first of all the visual people. And so, in a way, we usually always start with the music. We start by listening to the music, and then begin to find our ideas from that.
Now you've done The Little Prince and The Little Mermaid.
Are
you planning to do Little Women and do a series of...
No, but actually the next musical I am about to embark on is an original musical based on the Little House on the Prairie books, which I am going to be doing this summer at the Guthrie Theater.
Oh, that's very exciting.
Yeah, actually the composer is Rachel Portman, whom
you've worked with before,
who wrote The Little Prince and is best known for her film work. She's an Oscar-winning film composer for Emma and has written about 100 other film scores.
Very talented.
And
who did the libretto for?
Rachel Scheinkin, who wrote Spelling Bee. Oh. And the lyrics are by Donna Di Novelli, and we're going into rehearsals in just a few short months from our taping today.
They're telling me that I can't believe it, that we have to bring this first part to a close. It moved very quickly today. I wanted to thank you and our studio and home audience for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon for part 2 of my conversation.
I look forward to it.
Francesca Zambello. Now we're going to go out on another of your many facets, Florencia en el Amazonas, which you did the Houston Grand Opera in 2001. So let's hear that.
caramelo que se siente, un traguito de aguardiente.